The primary book I will be using is S. Ladoke Akitola, His Life and Times. This book was written by Akin Oshuntokun, was first published, Akinjide, I want to get the full name. Akinjide Oshuntokun was first published in 1984. It was reprinted in 2010. If you want the book, you can get it on Telegram on Radio Me Books. All right, so it talks about how the missionary introduced Western education into Yoruba territory. Christian missions provided Nigerians the opportunity to acquire Western education and a window through which to see other civilizations. The missionary factor in modern Nigeria was first perceived in Yoruba and Efik, and later in Igbo areas. So it was first in Yoruba, then in Efik, and that's why you have what we have, of course, in Calabar area. The point to note is that by dint of an earlier Christian proselytization, the Yoruba had a head start in the acquisition of Western education and all its consequences. Up to the 1920s, therefore, nationalist agitation for improvement in the African condition was led and completely dominated by the Yoruba and a few Efik and Ishekiri people. The Igbo did not become a factor in Nigerian nationalism until the arrival of Nnamdi Azikiwe in 1937. We've talked about it before when we're discussing NYM and what Zik did with the NYM. We're going to talk about it again because you can't talk about SLA without mentioning NYM and Daily Service, where he was an editor. But there's something I learned from reading this book I thought I would just share this morning before we go into SLA. Go. I'll read it, and I'm sure you're going to get the point. With his arrival, talking about Zik, with his arrival in Nigeria and the founding of his newspaper business, Azikiwe was able to fire the imagination of his people and mobilize them to catch up with the Yoruba with regard to Western education. But unlike most of the Yoruba, this goal was sometimes achieved by a community effort. What I'm about to read is an answer to a question that I have had for a bit, and I'm sure you're going to get the point without me having to say it, at least not yet. Members of certain villages or clans usually collected money to send ambitious and brilliant young men to the United States or Britain in search of the golden fleece. This practice, which was widespread in the eastern part of Nigeria, meant that when the young men returned to Nigeria after their studies, they would be obliged to return the favor of their own people, either by directly repaying the union that sent them, or by using their newly acquired status or position to somehow advance the cause of the clan or ethnic group. In a pluralist society such as Nigeria, this payment of an educational debt through favoritism and jobbery to one's ethnic group was to exacerbate inter-ethnic rivalry, if not antagonism. Let me pause to explain. I'm sure you got it. You read, you know stuff, but you want to know why. For instance, why are people so clannish? Why are people always trying to get people's spaces? I found part of the answer here. And what he's saying here is that the Ibos felt they were left behind. So what they did was to work together as communities. So again, the first set of unions were created in 1936, right? The first Igbo union was in 1936, and they started having them in Calabar, in Lagos, and in Port Harcourt, and then in other places. By 1943, that became Igbo Federal Union, and I think around 1948 became Igbo State Union. It was the same organization. I also remember that one of the issues that Onwafo Rizzo had in the 1950s, it was in 1953, was that he had collected money meant for the education of certain people in his community. They put money together and gave it to him. Since he had studied in the US, they gave him the money and he spent the money, which of course led him to prison before Azikiwe came along and somehow found a way to get him pardoned. Anyway, the point is that the community would raise money and send people to school. That's supposed to be beautiful and laudable and, nice, right? But here's the issue. When the person got back to Nigeria, they either pay the community back after working, or you have a situation where the person has to now pay that education debt through favoritism to his own ethnic group members, which explains why many parastatals in the federal government were completely filled by Igbo people. It was payback. People from the communities. And you saw it, for instance, in NRC, Nigerian Railway Corporation, where even a janitor, was a janitor or messenger, you can become, was meet the chairman of the selection committee. That's the recruitment exercise. Recruitment committee chairman was a messenger. And that happened because the person was from the same from the same town as, no, it was actually his brother, Ikejani. So what you see here is this: people who maybe you went to school based on community support, you feel indebted to the community. And the only thing you can do now that you have some bit of influence is to ensure that you're able to get other people in that community, get them jobs where you're working. Regardless of the fact that what you're doing is nepotism, but at least you are helping your own people. So I'm just saying that this explains some of the issues that I think we had, or that we still have, with the mentality of the average Igbo person in civil service. And this is not in the past, this is still present till today. The Yoruba student, by contrast, did not have to rely on his village or town to send him to London or New York, because in many cases, the parents concerned were involved in import-export trade or in the cocoa industry and were therefore able to pay the way of their children. Furthermore, with Lagos being the administrative and commercial capital of Nigeria, opportunities did exist for a quick profit and subsequent capital accumulation by the indigenous entrepreneur. Sometimes, too, the missionary societies, which are their headquarters in Yoruba land, were able to aid students in their aspirations toward a Western education without their having to rely on a communal financial levy.